Okay, so I screwed up a bit in that the computer that had my notes on it is the computer that we're using. And so I'm going to try to think of things better. So, we're going to be talking about geometric representation theory. And representation theory means that we're going to be talking about transformations. So, representation in this context means the representation of a group. It means a group acting on something, acting by a group of transformations. And typically, it means acting by linear transformations. So it means a group acting on a vector space. So, I mean, the group by itself is just the group. The group equipped with a way of thinking of it as transformations. The group equipped with its action, that's the representation. Typically, the transformation group will be a linear transformation group. That's traditional representation theory. But the fact that it's geometric representation theory is really going to mean, in part, it's going to mean a lot of things, not all of which I understand, but it's in part going to mean that the actions, the group actions on vector spaces that we're going to be studying will often be inspired by groups acting on other things. So we really are interested in other kinds of transformation groups besides just groups of linear transformation. And but in general, transformation groups can arise as groups of transformations preserving some structure. So just an example of this would be a diffeomorphism group. Which is a group of transformations that preserve differentiable structures. And yeah, so sometimes transformation groups arise in this way, as groups of transformations preserving some particular structure. But in fact, it's not just sometimes that this happens, it's really always that this happens. Anytime you have a transformation group, you can construe it, you can interpret it as the group of transformations preserving some structure on the set that's being acted on. So another way to say this would be to say that every transformation group is the group of something homomorphisms, sort of making a joke on diffeomorphisms. For something. So the diffeomorphisms, those are the automorphisms, or the symmetries. I guess I'm jumping around too much here. The diffeomorphisms are the automorphisms, or the symmetries of the differentiable structure. And that's what I mean by the something homomorphisms. The things that are preserving something, preserving some kind of structure. And so I hope that this slogan, the idea that every transformation group is the group of something, so to speak, I hope that it's plausible. Is it plausible? Okay. So if it's plausible, then could somebody give an idea how to prove it? Or perhaps also, besides proving it, we might also want to formalize it, since as stated, it's somewhat of an informal statement.
Then this was John was saying that thing of formally defining what a structure means.
Yeah, that's right. So John suggested that it's sort of a tautological issue here, that you could sort of say that you could define structure as being that which is preserved by a transformation group. Yeah, that's an interesting answer, an interesting easily answered, typical John. And I'll try to fish for other kinds of answers as well. Anybody have any other ideas about perhaps some more explicit way, a less tautological way that you can take it? So I should be able to hand you an arbitrary transformation group. You should be able to sort of tell me, you should be able to figure out what is the structure that's being preserved here. Well, I guess, yeah.
With the transformation group, there must be something with that, you know. So you give me that as well.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So we're talking about it. Yeah, let's just say it's like, you know, a subgroup of the permutations of a set S. So I hand you S, and I hand you G, and a subgroup of S span, yes. And I ask you whether you can describe somehow, the structure that's preserved by G.
So now do you mean there's a special structure that you want us to...
In fact, I should have said this stronger. I should have said for some essentially unique somehow.
So doing some sort of reconstruction.
Yes. But I guess to make the question more well defined, what we really need is, we really do need some sort of language for describing structures. And it's already been suggested that you could use group theory itself as a language for describing structures. And that's true, but there's something a little bit strange about using group theory itself. Did I do this right? There's something a little bit strange about using group theory itself as a language for describing structures. And that is that, how do I say it? It's like, group theory is really a negative language for describing structures. In the sense that what a group is explicitly describing is not describing the structures, it's not describing the structure, it's describing the symmetry. And symmetry and structure are sort of like opposite to each other. There's sort of a duality between symmetry and structure. And in some sense, I think of structure as being positive and symmetry as being negative. So one of the things we're going to be looking for is we're going to be looking for a language that's more of a positive language for describing structure. And, well, just a little bit of a hint here. This sort of duality between a positive language for describing structure and then symmetry, which is sort of a negative language for describing structure. In a way, that idea comes out of Galois theory. And one of the big things about Galois theory is that it has this contravariant nature to it. Which is that as a subfield is getting bigger, a subgroup is getting smaller. And that's really kind of an instance of this duality between positive structure and negative symmetry. So this this kind of duality between structure and symmetry, it's related to a lot of other dualities. Because you could also describe structure as being a lot like information. In a sense, structure is information. Structure is information of a kind. It's information, in some sense, that tells you how to tell different elements of a set apart from each other, or something of that flavor. And the thing that's sort of the negative of information, in the same way that symmetry is the negative of structure, is entropy. In some sense, symmetry is like entropy, and structure is like information. I guess another way to put it is I guess this is, so like when Einstein was developing the theory of spectral relativity, he called it relativity. And relativity was really kind of his name for group theory. Kind of the way that things look different as you shift your perspective. And supposedly he later sort of regretted calling it the theory of relativity. He later decided that maybe
it called it like the theory of invariance.
Yeah, the theory of invariance. Yeah. And again, it's this dual relationship. The things that are invariant is really the structure, it's the information, it's the positive part. The relativity, the entropy, the symmetry, that's sort of what makes it hard for you to see things. So in fact, we need a positive language for describing structure. And there are various different languages that you could use. Perhaps the word that would describe this kind of language in general is logic. That's kind of the job of logic, or one of the jobs of logic, is to put structure on a set. To put structure on a set to see, there's this concept of an axiomatic theory. Or a logical theory. And it's really a device for putting structure on a set. So, in an axiomatic theory, you have there are different flavors that you can use, but most of them go something like this. You have some concept of abstract predicates. And then you have axioms about the predicates. I guess another thing actually you have would be sometimes you have types. So an example of an axiomatic theory, and this is a somewhat perhaps informal example because it goes back so many thousands of years that it originates in the days when people weren't being that careful. It's Euclidean geometry, where you have things, you have different types of things, like you have points, lines, and then you have abstract predicates, which are things like point P lies on line L. So a predicate is like a relation between things. Well, except perhaps the predicate is the thing in the language that's used to describe the relation. And then, you have axioms about the predicates. What are some of the axioms of Euclidean geometry? Like,
Dolan,
yeah.
big one, the big one's
Say it again?
big point to it.
Oh, that was even shorter, right?
Lie on uniform.
And we just wrote that in sort of English, but you could, sort of make it more formal. So, the point is that this kind of logical language where you create axiomatic theories is a device for describing structure on a set in sort of positive way, by putting structure on the set instead of like in group theory. In group theory, you're really taking structure away from the set by putting transformations on it that you say have to preserve it. So in this example here of this kind of Euclidean geometry, what would be the kind of set that we would put the structure on? Well, it would be an actual alleged plane. Yeah, right. So you say, the model of the theory is sort of a concrete realization of the abstract types, predicates, and axioms. So I'm probably not going to get more precise about this concept of axiomatic theory than I feel that I need to get. I mean, I'm not sure how precise I'll need to get about it. At this point, I'm still being a little bit vague about what it is. But the reason I'm introducing it is to return to this question here, which was my sort of puzzle for us to try to figure out, which is, so if I introduce this concept of an axiomatic theory as a positive language for describing structure, I can make my question a little bit more precise. So in other words, now I hand you a transformation group and a set that is acting on it. And I ask you, can you create an axiomatic theory that describes the structure that's preserved by that set? And that's what I mean by showing that group is really the group of something homomorphism. So the automorphism of some structure described by a logical theory. So if there's anybody, particularly somebody who hasn't thought about this kind of thing before, have any ideas for how to do this?
You have to create the model like a base, so you want to create something out of that set.
Well, this right.
Bridge is built by the group.
Right, so this set S is the thing that's supposed to become the model.
Right.
So somehow you have to find the predicates and the axiom. I guess the types.
I'm thinking of something like,
Yeah.
graph components in a graph, and this picks out this graph. This component is fixed by this graph. It's a very vague analysis. I'm not even sure if it's an analysis.
Okay, that's the idea. We'll have to see how that. We'll have to see how that relates to what I'm going to try. So, I don't know. Does anybody have any vague ideas about how to do this? I mean, in a way, we've sort of already given a hint about it here. See, we're looking for the structure that's preserved by the group. So we're looking for the structure that's invariant under the group. We're looking for the invariance, so to speak. Looking for the invariant predicates is really what we're looking for.
So what I meant to say was something like that, that the entire permutation group changes all these graph components, but these fixed ones keep something the same.
Ah, okay, right. Yeah, it sounds like the orbits and
Something like, yeah, very basic.
yes, okay. Well, as you say, but it's a picture, and in fact, we're really going to try and make a picture out of it. So,
I don't know what it sort of means by graph components. Can you explain to me what you mean by that?
so a graph has edges and vertices and something like that, and like the component of the graph is where the thing is the parts all connected by edges. In fact, I really am going to be drawing things with vertices and edges and things like that, and I'm not sure exactly how it's supposed to come to this picture, but actually, I think it's going to come.
So do you want to talk about the orbits of the set? Is that what we're kind of...
That's going to be part of it. That's going to be a big part of it. There's an extra couple of tricks now, but that's a big part of it. But in some sense, the general flavor is that we're looking for all, to find what this is the symmetry group of, is going to be whatever, everything that is preserved by the group is going to be part of the theory that we're going to create. Now that makes the theory that we're going to create, from this point of view, perhaps a sort of inefficient theory. It's got, everything in it. And in fact, there are slicker ways of doing it, where you sort of come with a very efficient description of the theory, which needs very few predicates, very few axioms. But that's sort of an unnecessary slickness. We're really trying to understand the conceptual nature of it, and it's really probably better to think of this very inefficient description of the theory, where we're going to try and understand everything that's invariant under the given group. So yeah, so let's see, I guess this over here, and I'm going to start erasing this one. So in fact, I now need to get literally very picturesque. I really want to start trying to draw pictures. In an attempt to answer the question I raised, I'm going to start trying to draw pictures that are supposed to illustrate how to create an axiomatic theory from a transformation. And so I just need a silly name for the picture that I'm creating. And I call this the orbi-simplex picture. I'll say of a transformation group. Although perhaps I should really say that it's a picture of the axiomatic theory that corresponds to the transformation group. In some sense, it's really a picture of both of them at the same time, and that's supposed to be the point. You're sort of supposed to see how a transformation group and an axiomatic theory are, in some sense, the same thing. I just claimed that the concept of transformation group and the concept of axiomatic theory are, in some sense, the same thing. But I should put in a little bit of fine print there. So, yeah.
All this the same thing? So does an axiomatic theory give you a transformation group?
Yes, and that's a good point. Yes, an axiomatic theory. Okay. I'll try to I'll try to make that a little bit more precise right now. So first of all, I'm going to put a couple of restrictions. Just to keep things simple, I'm going to put a couple of restrictions, which are going to hopefully make things simpler, in particular make it easier to answer your question. So one of the restrictions that I'm going to put on here is, for the moment, even though we're ultimately interested in, for example, infinite groups, for the moment we're going to put a very strong finite restriction on. So we're going to only think about finitary transformation group. And by a finitary transformation group, I just mean that both the group and the set that are being acted on are both finite. That's a very strong restriction. It's not absolutely necessary for what we're doing, but it makes it easier. And for the kind of axiomatic theory that we're going to talk about, I'll say that it's a complete axiomatic theory with an axiom stating that the universe of the model is finite. Bounded by n. Yeah?
Since I don't know anything about logic,
Yeah.
there are valid models with such an axiom, valid universes with such an axiom.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you mean that
in this universe to bound anything by finite numbers, so I'm just saying. Just for the record, I mean, there actually do exist valid logical universes.
oh yeah, so you're mostly like used to like the universe of all sets or something like that.
Yes.
Yes, but that's like a really big thing. Logicians often like to play this little toy theory. There's a certain kind of logician, like a toy logician like me, sometimes like to play with a toy universe, which is.
And then they do bound stuff like finite numbers.
Yes, yes, yes. And just like this is a very severe restriction on transformation groups, this is a very severe restriction on logical theories. It really does make, in some sense, it probably makes your theory into like a toy compared to what real logicians would do. But so we're trying to keep things simple at this point. What? What does it mean? Complete means that every statement in the theory, every formula with no free variables in it, is either true or false. There are no unprovable, there are no undecidable statements.
Undecided.
Yeah. And
there might be something that is true but not provable. That is not allowed.
well, see, again, by putting this very severe finiteness restriction, we're really removing all of the fun stuff about undecidability from the whole situation.
So if you were saying if it's true, it is also provable, then
yeah,
it's not false.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So the function of this completeness assumption here is, in a sense, to answer your question. I think your question was, how, from an axiomatic theory, can we get a group? And this completeness requirement, together with the boundedness of the size of the universe, that actually implies that all models of the theory are isomorphic. It's sometimes called a categorical theory, a theory that really only has one kind of model.
Yes, again. Can you what's the model of the theory?
In this example over here, the Euclidean geometry is the plane itself. The Euclidean plane itself. Any Euclidean plane you can find is a model of the theory. Right.
Okay.
So the point is that if all models are the same, pretty much, once you've seen one model, you've seen them all, that means you can take that model and you can take its automorphism group. And that's a way of getting a transformation group. It will not just be an abstract group, but it will act on the universe of the model. And it's very intuitively plausible, I think, that these processes of taking the invariant structure and then creating an axiomatic theory by taking the invariant structure in some sense, we have to think precisely what we mean by that, is somehow inverse to the process of taking the automorphism group of the model of the theory.
The forward direction is the direction that John sort of casually suggested last week and that Apurva repeated, right? Is the one of the forward.
The direction is what John suggested as an inverse to the backward, as a formal inverse to the backward direction. Yes.
The forward direction being
that is what Jim is saying.
I guess, yeah. So something which is actually this is a sort of formal linear structure.
Yeah. This is the one you just told us about.
Yeah.
This is the one you are going to tell us about.
Yeah.
With the orbi-simplex picture.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, and there are generalizations where we remove the completeness requirement. And when you remove the completeness requirement, you actually have to change this from a group to a groupoid. Just like a theory can have several different models, a groupoid could have several different objects, several different isomorphic classes of objects. And a non-complete theory could have several different isomorphic classes of models.
Real quick, just stating what group you said we can construct out of this.
I was pretty sloppy about it. I said, since all the models of the theory are essentially the same, just pick one at random and take the automorphism group of that model. I was sloppy because I said pick one model at random. I think it's a better way to say it, but I'm having trouble remembering exactly how to say it. We'll see how it goes.
What is the last one?
By n.
Bounded by n. Bounded by some number n, just some finite number n.
Completeness requirement, is it non-contrary causes uncertainty?
You heard about that? Yeah, I tried to say something about that. That Gödel's theorems and things like that, they really involve situations where there's a whole lot of infinite stuff going on. So we're in such a simple toy situation that Gödel's theorems just don't really come into play because we have, we're dealing with a finite universe.
The language is sufficiently strong or complicated or something.
Yeah,
So you need to assume to.
So of course you could check true and falseness in every stage because you go through every possible case.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's right, something like that. That's right.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. Right, so sometimes we're trying to avoid the kind of logical subtleties that logicians love to talk about. We're trying to avoid that. We're playing a different game. And okay, so now we're trying to introduce the orbi-simplex picture, which is supposed to really help us understand going in this direction. So what is the orbi-simplex picture? The orbi-simplex picture is basically this. Orbit space of the action of G on the simplex whose vertexes are the elements of S. That's why I call it the orbi-simplex. There's an orbit space of the simplex. Now I'll try to explain what some of this means. So let's see. So space here, for the moment, you can construe space just to be topological space. Okay. And let's see. Since a lot of you like group theory, you probably know what an orbit space is. You have the group acting on space, and you take a sort of quotient space where each orbit becomes a point of the new quotient space. And so the main question, I guess, is what is this simplex that I'm talking about here?
So,
Yeah.
simplex basically means that every vertex is connected to every other. It's a complete graph.
It's more than a graph, though. I mean, for example, you can think of it as a topological space. You can think of it as, but I really am going to vacillate a bit about whether I want to think of it as a topological space or whether I want to think of it as some sort of combinatorial object, somewhat like a graph. But I probably really want something more complicated than a graph. So there are these combinatorial objects called things like simplicial complexes, and simplicial sets, and semi-simplicial complexes. Maybe those are the same things as simplicial sets, I forget. But these are like little combinatorial objects, sort of like graphs, except graphs only have zero-dimensional parts and one-dimensional parts, so like dots and edges, vertexes and edges. But there are things like graphs, but they have higher-dimensional pieces to them. And the simplicial complex or simplicial set is something like that. And this is really going to be, what we're going to be dealing with is really a lot like that. And, I guess that even happens with graphs. In fact, I think a graph is something that people sometimes vacillate about whether they're dealing with a purely combinatorial object, or sometimes they actually make a topological space out of the graph.
Do we have no other characteristics or something like that?
Yeah, there's probably all sorts of fun things that you can do when you actually turn a graph into a topological space. So, when it seems to be necessary, I'll try to be more precise whether I'm talking about a combinatorial object or a topological space or whatever. So, yeah, okay, but we should try and give some description of what a simplex is. So, remember to describe drawing a simplex. So, like, this is what's called a zero simplex. This is what's called a one simplex. This is what's called a two simplex. And you can call it other names. It's like called like a point, an edge, a triangle. Probably just a solid triangle. And the next one would be a solid tetrahedron. It would be solid. So this would be the 0 simplex, this would be the 1 simplex, 2 simplex, 3 simplex. And keep on going into however high dimension you want. Just add one new vertex each time. And let's see, it's a nice formal way of defining this. You can define this as like the convex hull of
The origin and the
yeah,
coordinate.
yeah, something like that. So this is what we're going to do. So let me start giving an example of what we're talking about. So we need an example of a G and an example of an S. And I'm going to try to keep this pretty simple. In particular, I'm just trying to keep our pictures drawable. We don't want them to get too high dimensional, because you can't see them well on the whiteboard. So in fact, I really don't want S to get bigger than 3 points at this point, because as long as S is just 3 points, I can draw the simplex on the whiteboard pretty well. As soon as I have 4 points, I'm already in a little bit of trouble. So I have to draw 3-dimensional things on the whiteboard. So S is going to be the 3-element set. So we're going to have some group G, which is going to be a subgroup of this 6-element group, 3 banks, the group of all permutations of the 3-element set. And that was just not that many different choices about what G could be. There's only a relatively few different, really different subgroups of 3 banks. So trying to figure out what example we should start with. Yeah, let's start with the example of let's define G to be the transformations let me call them invertible transformations. Make it more explicit. There we go. They group. Invertible transformations of the 3-element set A, B, C that preserve A. So how big is G? 2-element subgroup. And the instructions for how to create the orbi-simplex are right here. And I don't know, can somebody describe what this looks like? What do the instructions tell? So they tell us to start with the simplex whose vertexes are the elements of X. So this is S over here. So the names of the vertexes of this simplex are A, B, and C.
You never specified how we build that simplex. Is it, as a Purva suggested, that every point is connected to every other point?
It's still in simplex, but the simplex comes with 1 phase, 2 phases, 3 phases. So that was its point.
Yeah, this is
Not
just
more
a
than
solid
that.
triangle.
Oh, okay.
This is just taking the convex.
Oh, no, you're right.
solid.
Yeah,
Finite dimensional
that's right.
phases as well. That's what they study.
You can just sort of say, 3 random points in a vector space that aren't linearly dependent or something like that. I think as long as they're linearly independent, you just sort of take the convex hull.
The simplex is just the n simplex if S is of size n.
Yes.
That's all, right?
Yeah, this evil, horrible thing that the 0-dimensional simplex has 1 vertex.
Okay.
So there's horrible confusion about that, unfortunately. So this is, we call the 2 simplex. 2 simplex for the triangle. Yeah, I think just make it a little easier for take it. No, actually, okay, that is the right one. Okay. A, B, and C. So this is the simplex, and then the orbi-simplex is supposed to be the orbit space, and you're adjusting that to look like what? Yeah, I mean, it's
part of one point.
Right, B and C.
right. I agree. B and C is the same.
Just link it to A, B, C, and say that that's one point in your space, right?
Say it again. I'll link what?
I mean, this picture is the same as the picture where B and C are flipped in the orbital space.
So,
Yeah.
right, so both B and C will go to each other, and the lines connecting A and B, the line connecting A and B will go to the line connecting A and C.
I'm not going to follow you. Can you draw what you're saying?
So, and I think he's saying, are we going to draw another, are we looking to draw a second
Oh,
picture here, and he's trying to describe a second picture?
yeah, I was just trying to draw a second picture.
Yeah,
I was trying
What he's
to-
saying is, so now in the second picture, we only have two vertices. We have called the one A and the other one orbit BC.
Okay, I
Those are
agree
our
with
two
that.
orbits. Those are our two orbits of this transformation here.
Okay, but now what should I draw here? Just draw a line down here? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that a line to draw? I mean, the reason they happen to be in an orbit space is like this quotient space that you get by identifying points in the same orbit. So I think in this picture, yes, there are a lot of orbits that aren't really showing up in the picture yet. So I mean, I'm going to draw how I would draw it. I would draw it like this. It's supposed to be half of it, or like, it's like I'm folding the triangle down this axis. You know, folding it so that B and C. I guess, in this case, I'm folding C over, so it lands on D. And I guess I actually get a right triangle, okay? There's a little right triangle right there. So what's happening here is that when you create this orbi-simplex, you're doing a sort of lot of folding. The picture gets really creased a lot. And the fact that it's getting creased encourages us to draw the picture in a certain way, sort of subdivide the picture in a certain way using the creases. And this is where we're introducing what's called the barycentric subdivision of the simplex. What we're really doing is we're just introducing we're just naturally introducing the creases that form when you fold the simplex according to the action of the group. First of all, let's see. I guess one thing that's hidden in this description up here, it says the orbit space of the action of G on the simplex whose vertexes are the elements together. Now, I guess probably somebody could explain that why did G act on the simplex? I mean, right, that's not what he was originally acting on. He was acting on the set of vertexes. But it follows pretty simply that once you know how G acts on the vertexes of the simplex, it actually acts on the whole simplex, sort of by, I guess, convex combination, extending the action by means of convex combination. So it actually makes sense that he's acting on the whole simplex.
I guess my question for, and I complain about this
Yeah.
picture you've drawn is, we've now in some way created this third vertex now that I don't, what are we even labeling that, or are we just kind of pretending it's not there?
No, okay, that's a great question. We really desperately need a good labeling system.
Yeah.
for this. And we will introduce one. And in fact, John Orr secretly introduced pretty little test that will be meeting on whatever that was, Thursday.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So it seems to imagine that you have simplex, the move axon and the permute the vertices.
Say it again?
The move axon the simplex, so the vertices get permuted.
Move back on the simple, yeah, that's
So
right.
the ACB will become ABC. And now we know we can, so now you have two triangles, like ABC and ACB.
Yeah.
And then you can change one to the other by rotating around that tree that it is group.
Yeah.
Now if you're given a general set S, that's possibly infinite.
Yeah.
And you have some permutation.
So I did try to make it easier on us by assuming finiteness. But,
Okay, suppose finite, suppose this is finite.
okay.
You're given a group and permute some vertices.
Yeah.
That would lead to two different simplices, let's say, in the same position, space, but different names of the coordinates. Let's say ACC and ABC.
Yeah.
You can think of them as occupying the same point in space, but just as the labels are different.
Yeah, you can think of it that way, yes.
Is it true that you can rotate this one somehow, somewhere, make the vertices basically like this?
Oh, you mean rotating actually in physical space?
In physical space, maybe in a higher number of dimensions.
Yeah, in higher number of dimensions you can do it, yeah.
You can always do it.
Yeah, you can. But you don't even need, for our purposes, you don't even need to be able to do that. And in fact, I mean, so this one actually still has to go to higher dimensions. It reverses the orientation.
Yes, yes. And because you said the G acts on the simplex, that's the way. I mean, it doesn't preserve the simplex, or if it does so, it changes the coordinate name.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as acting by maps from the simplex to itself. I think, you know.
Can you show me how, like, the permutation, the one non-trivial element of this expression?
Sure, I mean, it's just near reflection. You know, it takes this point of the simplex to this point, it takes this point to this point.
Oh, so
It fixes everything on this.
So it acts on the simplex without labeling. That's what you're saying, because in C doesn't.
Yeah, it actually,
Okay.
it acts on this topological space.
On stuff.
It acts
But
on
the
this topological
labelings come up, the labelings are about to change.
Yeah, you're right. The legends are just declarations for
Okay.
helping us see what's
That's
going on.
before that.
Yeah. Right. And again, this is part of my vacillation about whether we're doing combinatorial objects or whether we're thinking of a topological space. It shouldn't matter too much, I don't. Yeah. So, so we're going to consider all of the ways that the group could possibly crease the triangle. And in that way, we're going to subdivide the triangle in this method. And this method is called barycentric subdivision. I'll draw a picture of that now. And it will be useful. It's useful if we create these creases that it will make it easier to see how the folding is taking place. If you explicitly introduce, if you draw the creases, and as he suggested, invent a labeling system to label the creases, then it becomes easier to understand how the picture is depicting the orbit space of the group action. So, here's just a bigger picture of our triangle.
In this case, now the group is a full permutation group? In the sense that, if it was just those that two element group, you just had the one.
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, I guess I'm saying that it's not so much that I've definitely decided that G is going to be the full permutation group, but I am thinking about the full permutation. The full permutation is what's helping us draw this figure. And yeah, it says the creases that I'm introducing are the creases that you get from, yes, they are the creases
Or
you
what
get.
you're saying is, since the labels are not fixed, you can label them any way, and then that group, so label it some way, look at the crease that you get, do this for all possible ways, and these are exactly all the creases. Because you never fix your label, that's exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. But maybe I will introduce the labeling here. And we'll call this ABC. Yeah, in fact, I will call this ABC, because that will help in the further labeling of the parts.
But then what does that stand for?
What does which
The
stand for?
thing started from C, the crease started from C. That's not preserving your...
I'll start in one. I'll try to start in one. But look, it's a little bit helpful if I have colors here. We'll use green for the vertexes. And then I'll use blue for the centers of the edges, or the so-called barycentrics of the edges. Barycenter means something like center of mass or something like that. So these blue things are like the centers of mass of the edges. And when I say of the edges, I mean of the original edges. The triangle just has these three edges over here. Triangle just has these three edges over here. And the barycenters are these blue dots. I'm part of trying to explain why this kind of subdivision, this kind of creasing, is called barycentric subdivision. Because the colored dots that I'm introducing here are the barycenters of the faces of the original simplex. So, so the blue dots are the barycenters of the edges, and the red dot is the barycenter of the triangle itself. There's just one red dot right in the middle. And I guess we could think of the green dots as the barycenters of the vertexes, but of course they're the center, there's only one point. And now I'm going to introduce the labeling system. So in some sense, every piece of this picture is going to get a label. But actually, I guess I should really try to make this picture big, particularly if we had the trouble with the camera or something, trying to do small things. So we're trying to make the picture really big. So. So the labelings that I'm going to use here are basically what you might call Young diagrams or Young tableaus or something like that. Now I'm trying to remember, so John, on Thursday, he was drawing Young diagrams, right? And sometimes he filled in the boxes. Yeah. So we're going to do something like that here. So that's, of course, going to raise the question of what is the relationship between what John was talking about on Thursday and what I'm talking about right now. We're both going to be drawing very similar diagrams. And that's an interesting question. What is the relationship between what John was talking about and what I'm going to be talking about here? There's certainly a relationship, but it might not be completely obvious in the surface. So we'll just see how it goes.
So is this like our universe in the sense that whole space and stuff?
In some sense, the universe, if you go think of it as X, it's like a universe with just three things in it. A radically simplified universe. It has three things in it.
What are the
The lines are supposed to, the lines and the higher dimensional things are for the purpose of understanding and visualizing that the way things work is that things don't just exist in isolation. There are relationships between things in mathematics and in the universe and in real life also. Not only in the universe, but also in real life. And so, for example, so in some sense, the purpose of introducing these triangles, for example, is to talk about things like talk about something, what are kind of sort of triangles that you run into real life, where you sort of run into like a love triangle or something like that, where you have like A and B and C, and A loves C, and B loves C, and therefore A hates C. Or you have a hate triangle, like now.
So this is like
Yes.
two of the edges are different from each other.
Yeah. But somehow the idea is, a love triangle doesn't actually, well, maybe sometimes it does, but it usually doesn't actually have like a rope connecting people's necks. It's just a metaphor. It's just kind of a metaphor.
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah. So the edges that you're seeing, in the picture here are the invisible ropes connecting people's necks when they have a relationship, that kind of thing. And so right, the lesson is supposed to be, that no man is an island. The lesson is supposed to be that, it's the relationships between things and between people that are important. I like to dramatize that by thinking about a rope connecting people's necks.
That does it.
It's nice. So, right, I have to try to introduce the labeling here. So, this is A at the top. D, and here. And this is B. This is A, C. This is B, A. This blue dot is I guess I'll write like A, B, like that. I think somebody, Yeah, there was a question about this that went around in email, which is when you have one of these horizontal Young diagrams, you should really think of it as being a lot like a traditional brace notation for set. You know, like when you have a set A, comma C, traditional braces, and it's supposed to be telling you that you're not supposed to think of it as being any different from
Unordered pair.
Yeah, it's an unordered pair, exactly. And you're not supposed to give any extra information about the ordering when you have one of these horizontal rows. But one of the ways that you can simulate the idea of not giving any extra information is by always using a standard order, like alphabetical order or something like that. And that's what I did here. I listed A before C, not because I want A to come before C. It doesn't. I mean, if I'm here, A comes sort of before C, and here C comes before A. But here I really mean that, there's no difference. And this one would be A, B. This one would be, and I'll try to give sort of a more precise algorithm, a more precise rule for how I'm getting this. You can probably guess from what I'm doing how it works. This would be A, B. Horizontal what?
The red dot is the horizontal ABC.
Yes. Yeah, so okay, let me try and do, yeah, so, right, well, the picture gets a little crowded here. So it's supposed to be A, B, C squared. Horizontal A, B squared, right in the middle. There it is? These spaces? Yeah, I'm trying, yeah, let me get about everything. Let me sort of try and give sort of the features of how this rule works. Like this, it's like, not really sure whether there's 4 or 3 things here, but like, yeah, I can try to draw it like this. Sort of draw it like breaks off at the right end. And the green dot, in some sense, corresponds to this break between the first 2 boxes. And the blue dot corresponds to the second break, and the red dot corresponds to the third break. But what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that when you look at any piece of this picture, like, okay, this one is this thing right here is a labeling just this blue dot. The blue dot by all by itself has none of the colors except for blue. So you look up here and you see that blue sort of splits this thing up into 2 parts, and the part that's way to the right is always left out of the picture. That's the way the rule works. So that's how I end up with just a horizontal thing here. You can see. Does that make sense? See, it's like I'm taking these four things,
Yes.
and I'm going to make a Young diagram out of them by slicing it in certain ways. In this case, I slice it, the blue color is telling me to slice it right down there.
Sure.
And then I always throw away the rightmost one, the rule says. And then I stack the rest of them. So that's how this one got to be CB. Or at least that's how it got to be one thing on top of another thing. Because it says there's a green and a blue in this piece right here. This is the label for this edge here. And it's got a green and a blue. So that's telling you put a slice at the green and a slice at the blue. And that leaves you with this throwaway piece.
The whole thing is sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever that piece is. You throw away the rightmost piece, and you just stack the remaining ones. And so, for example, what was this one here? A green and a red.
A single block and then a row of two?
Yeah, yeah. What about this one here? This one is red and blue.
You have a two and then one.
Two and a one. So,
That's the ABC.
say it again?
That's the ABC and the.
Yes, I agree. And I guess this is sort of demonstrating that we really do want uncombed Young diagrams here. I don't really know what the synonym is for uncombed Young diagrams. I don't know if other people even use them, but they certainly come in handy in situations like this. Let's see, are there any other kinds of pieces that we haven't labeled here yet? Oh, spaces. Anybody know what those kind of look like?
There'll be one.
Yeah, they'll be very vertical.
This combination.
Yeah, so right. So notice one thing that's going on here. In this case, there are 6 of these sort of chambers, which correspond to the 6 elements of the group. And that's what we're sort of doing. We're sort of listing, in some sense. You can think of it as the 6 elements of the group, or
That would be A, C, B. That's it.
okay, now maybe it is ACD. Yes, that would be ACD. And this would be, I'm trying to understand my own rule better, but yeah, you're definitely right. That's ACD. And this is ACC.
C first.
So it's CAB.
Oh.
I'm sort of starting at the green and then going towards the blue.
Deviated.
Yes, deviated.
That's the side of the.
So you're going by, what you want to talk about is dimension almost.
Say it again?
You almost think of it as dimension, you start with the 0-dimensional object. the point.
Yeah,
The
that's what I'm doing.
one-dimensional object represents the line, and then the third dimension is going up.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. B-C-N? I guess that's all set enough. I didn't finish labeling all of these other edges, but I think I did at least show all the kinds of edges that show up. Let's at least go ahead and see what the picture looks like if we do, in fact, what somebody suggested and take our transformation group to be the whole group. Let's see what the picture looks like when we fold it up completely. So, describe what it would look like.
You would have a triangle. You would have a triangle where ABC were all one vertex. So one of the if you have a triangle, one of the vertices would be ABC, would be all three of them.
Yeah, that's
Identified
right.
together.
Blue and red.
So you can have one green, one red, and one blue.
Yeah, I like to say, yeah, that's right. So in fact, and so it's supposed to be a quotient space, but we sort of key to think of it as a subspace. And this thing was being one of these sectors. So like it would be like.
What you're saying is start with this whole big configuration and then just take that part of it that you get by folding.
Say that once again?
You start off with this big thing. and
Yeah.
then, for our group G, it is going to half of this.
Oh,
Sorry.
yes, that's right, yes. But for the original group G, yes, okay.
For the trivial group, this is it. For the original group G, this will be half of it. So the full group will be a picture.
That's right, that's right, that's right. But, probably not right now because we're running out of time, but, next time we should really do the examples you're mentioning. We could do, in particular, that example over there. We could have the full picture with all the priests in it. We didn't put in all the priests over there.
Yeah.
And, we could also do the only other example for a three-element set. There's one other
It's
interesting.
just the six.
That's right.
The D3,
That's
right?
right. So we should also do that example next time. And what other kind of things should we do? Well, if we can finish what we're talking about here, which has to do with getting, it has to do with, to kind of restate what we're supposed to be doing today. We're studying this idea that a transformation group can really be interpreted as an axiomatic theory. And we're trying to draw pictures which are going to eventually help us understand how to interpret the transformation group as an axiomatic theory. But of course, that leads open the real question, which is, what the hell does that have to do with group representation theory? And so, we'll try to get to that as well. Let me finish this picture.
So by the way, is that what we should think of as orbi-simplex picture?
Say it again?
Sorry.
This is kind of the beforehand picture. This is before the folding.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, right. After the folding is what we call the orbi-simplex. And it's possible that we may have used both for the creased version that we're inventing now, and we may also sometimes have used for the uncreased version. The uncreased versions are very difficult to see sometimes because they, folded in weird ways, and unless you draw the creases, it's hard to see what's going on. So the creases are a visual aid. And so when we fold this up like this, we can't use the same sort of labeling system over here because as somebody mentioned that we should consider the green thing to be both A and B and C. I guess both this is the right way. And so I have to draw a lot of things, A and B and C. Or, in fact, one thing I can do, in this case, it actually works nicely if you just draw the undiagram. So this green thing up here is really just this thing up here. This thing is this thing over here. This thing is this thing over here. What is this? This one's like this? Is that right?
Well,
I think it is. It's just like this one. These actually get folded on top of each other.
Yeah.
And this one would be like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. And if you count the, did I leave any up? I think that's it. If you count the number of pieces here, it's actually equal to 2 to the 3 minus 1. I hope. I think there are 7 of these uncombed Young diagrams that we can include. And in fact, there's probably a secret. I don't know why the minus 1 is happening. There's probably some secret explanation for it. But
Well, it's a, well, and then if you divide by 2 minus 1, what you have is the cubiform integer.
I didn't even, is that really significant? That might be significant for all I know. I don't know.
I think it's like the complement of the exterior space. There are 8 regions or something.
Yeah, right.
So that may be, okay, yeah.
Well, I think the missing 8th one is the empty part, the negative 1-dimensional space.
Oh, okay.
And
So that may be, yeah.
so the point I'm trying to make is that once again in this picture there are 3 things here, and you can omit or include any of them, and that explains why you're getting 8 or perhaps 7 different things over here. And we'll leave it here for now.